Okay, welcome to the podcast. I'm hanging out with Peter Bishop and Bill Robinson, co-founders of Tastely. How are you guys doing?
Superb.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Superb and good. Superb
So
is
I'm
better
seriously
than good.
way better than him because superb is an adjective.
Yeah, I'm just good. It's good.
Okay, so I'm just going to get right into it. So what is Tastely? So I want to know what it is from, say, a consumer's perspective and from a vendor's perspective. So maybe Bill, just describe, what is Tastely?
So we had a lot of time over COVID, obviously, to explore ways that we could help out the breweries and distilleries because there was obviously a challenge going on then. And it was neat to see that both from the consumer side and from the vendor side, there was a need. So from the consumer side, I'd get asked questions all the time like, oh, I tried to book a tasting, or I tried to book a tour, or like, at such and such a brewery. I'd call and I'd email them, and that was the only portal to do it. And it just didn't feel like it was an easy or efficient process. And lots of times people would just give up. So that's lost revenue to the vendors, and it's a frustration where the consumers aren't enjoying themselves as much as they could be. On the vendor side, they just didn't, they're busy, they're small business owners. They've got lots going on, lots of balls in the air at any given time, probably wearing lots of hats. So they didn't really have the capacity to book something other than just in a general calendar, right? And that didn't always work. It wasn't efficient. It didn't help them promote their business or anything like that. There's also, a lot of them didn't know necessarily where to start or how to host an experience, right? Like they're like, yeah, here's some beer. It's really good. And they say the IBUs and how they brewed it. And to some people, like really people into beer, that's great. That's what they want. But for the vast majority of people, that's only a small part of what they want. They want to hear like, oh, what's cool about your brewery? Why'd you name it this? Why'd you name that beer that? It's haunted? That's super cool. Like it's in this old building. Oh, it's like, there's all kinds of cool things about each of these breweries and distilleries and restaurants, but they weren't knowing how to showcase that. So we gave them the training tools to do that, the tools to book these experiences. And then on the consumer side, it's an easy platform to go in and go, that looks cool. I want to do that for my date night, or I've never been to that city before. I want to have a cool place to start, or, we need a corporate outing, or just people who are looking for new things to do.
Yeah. So Peter, for you, how do you see consumers using this? Like, is this something that, say, a person's visiting a city, is this the portal to kind of learn about what local breweries there are, where the closest breweries are? How do you see consumers using this ideally?
Yeah, well, good question. I think that, for starters, we built a web app, so it's available for everyone. You don't have to download an app off the App Store. I think the stats are people use about 7 out of the millions of apps that they have on their phone at any given time. So the notion of just having a website you can go to and one place for everyone to go to see all the breweries, if you want to search by breweries or search by experiences. So we have tours and tastings. We're about to launch events. There's a couple different ways to dissect it. You can look by zones. You can look by areas that are close to you. But just having one place where everyone can go to is kind of like Open Table, right? Before that, you'd have to call the restaurants, or you'd have to know the number. You'd go and kind of search them on Google. Now there's just one place where you can go and create these little experiences with your groups and do something a little different. Because when you're trying to figure out what to do with your friends, you tend to fall to the basics, like go to a restaurant or hit the movies or go to maybe a bar. But having a tasting experience is something that everyone can talk about. We always talk about telling better stories. I think that's part of it, is having something new to do with your book club or your boys group or whatever. Whenever you get the gang together, here's another option. And it's a great way to kind of explore the rest of our community as well. So it's a bit.
I didn't know you were in a gang. That's great.
A gaggle.
Yeah, it's a bit of my dark past that I don't really bring up very often. Yeah.
So one of the things, and I think you touched on it, Bill, how you the experiences can be different at different breweries, right? Like you want to kind of showcase the uniqueness. I know traveling with my wife, we've visited different breweries when we're in different cities, and she really loves getting to know the people behind the brands, getting to try them, hearing their stories. But she doesn't like necessarily doing tours, probably because she's been a part of so many tours. She's seen the back end of a brewery with me 1,000 times. So seeing it 1,001 times isn't necessarily of interest. So is that why you guys kind of separated that, where they can do the tours or the tastings, or they can do both. It's kind of a little bit of a, like, they're able to, I guess, create their own experiences that they want the consumer to have. Is that right?
Yeah. So like there are some places out there that love doing tours and they see that as huge value. Other places want to focus on different aspects of their business. So, there's Revival Brewcade in town that does like video games, and they got great beers, they got great food. So they're going to put an experience around that, right? Whereas Vacay, were there yesterday, and they've got like, they want to do tours. They're like, people are constantly coming in here because it's such a cool old building. People want to go in and do those tours. Well, that's something they have problems organizing because they're getting so many requests, right? But if they've got a portal like this, it just simplifies it for them, takes the pressure off, and still, like, you really want to be able to do these things for people because some people really want to do that. And once they've done a tour or a tasting, they're going to feel connected to your business in a way that they wouldn't any other way.
Right.
Yeah. And then they become advocates for you because they're going to go out and tell these stories. It's like, oh, I was in this cool place and I did this. And they're going to want to tell all their friends because they did something different. And all of a sudden, other people are going to want to go there. It's going to drive business to these small businesses. And it's really important for us to support them throughout the year, to drive people in and really give them the chance to tell their stories, because they are cool stories, right? Like,
when especially, like you said, what I love about breweries is you go into each of them and you think, okay, well, how many different variations of breweries can there be? But because each group is so unique just in their personalities, that's reflected in the rooms, and it's reflected in the beers that they're producing. And so getting in there and getting to learn about the breweries, I think is really special. And then to your point, Bill, that's how you create ambassadors, right? Because they're the ones that are going to want to go to, a dinner party with that 6-pack or whatever and say, oh, I met these people and, here's their story. Very similar, I think, to like when you go to a restaurant and somebody in the group knows the chef, like they're very proud of that, right? And so they want to kind of share the chef's story. Yeah. Similar idea here.
And Tastily, we're wanting to include like distilleries, cideries, meaderies, eventually eateries, things like that. Like we don't want to just limit it. The breweries are obviously the most eager because this is the thing they do. A brewery tour is a well-known concept and a tasting and stuff like that. But distilleries are coming on board too, and they've got tastings and they've got stories, and all of these. The one commonality is they all had the courage to start a small business, which is a very brave thing to do. But other than that, they all have super unique stories and different backgrounds and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
I think what's cool about this industry too is that, there's not a lot of things produced locally anymore. And so these are companies producing things locally. You can look at this can and be like, this was made there, a spirit. You can look at a bottle and you can trace it back to not just where it was made, but who was making it. I think that's really cool.
You can, and like the ingredients, a lot of them are grown locally. Yeah. We use local water, locally trained brewmasters and distillers and stuff like that. And it's like people buy it here, they drink it here, and that cycle just stays in the community. So
yeah, you got to think there's got to be some great stories too, because it's tough. Like getting started, I don't know how. Like just having a little bit of experience in there, it's really hard to get going and get all the facilities. You have to go quite often into a crazy debt to kind of support all this, and then you're trying to hire staff, and just getting up from the ground. I just think there's always a crazy story behind that.
Like the learning curve, because you're oftentimes learning every aspect of your business at the same time, right?
Yeah.
When you were saying that, one story that I always find interesting is Mark from Two Rivers. He opened just before COVID, a beautiful distillery. And how do you get through that, and how do you get your product out there when most often he wasn't allowed to have people in the distillery, he wasn't able to go to festivals, and so the things that people have persevered over the last few years, I think those stories are really, really cool and worth sharing for sure.
And I just to add to that, I think that this gives people a really memorable experience. Like I was with Graham Sherman last week and from Toolshed, and somebody happened to walk by wearing a Toolshed hat. So of course Graham was like, "Hey, I love your hat." And the guy's like, "Yeah, I love this hat." And was a little concerned why this guy was yelling at him. And Graham explained, "Oh, it's my brewery." And and the guy recognized him, said, "Oh, yeah, no, I remember you now. I did a brewery tour with you and you were so passionate talking about your business and stuff." Yeah. Like I've told so many people about that, and the trickle down effect from these experiences is huge for these businesses, right? And like you just said, they're basically building the plane as they're trying to fly it, and that's a tough thing to do. So trying to organize tours, tastings, those interactions is maybe and sometimes too much to ask of them,
right.
But giving them something that makes it easy for them to do that, so that their business can thrive and grow, is what we're trying to do.
Well, and also let them focus on what their expertise are, and if there's ways that you guys being in the industry as long as you have, whether it's in the beer industry or in the marketing industry, whatever tools you guys have built, if you can kind of help them in their kind of journey through that, I think is important. So Peter, I want to talk about the partnership, because Tastely is ultimately a partnership between ZGM and ABF.
Right.
So, and you've been with ZGM for 17 years now, is that right?
Yeah, I saw it on LinkedIn show up the other day. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting old. But yeah, it's about 17 and a half years now. Yeah.
So just to talk a little bit about like maybe your experience in the industry, like before ZGM, where did you get your start in, let's say, the marketing industry, and why were you drawn to that?
Yeah, sure. It's a crazy kind of windy road, so I'll do my best to keep this relatively brief. But in the late 90s, I was an illustrator and a waiter and playing in a band.
Nice.
And thus, I kind of figured one of those things was going to break, but probably not illustration. I just did that on the side. But one of my friends who I was waitering with, he took a course at night called it was like a webmaster course, which shows how old this was. And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty cool to be anything like that. So he took it, and he got a job. His teacher hired him at this publishing company in Edmonton called Oz New Media, and he referred me as a digital illustrator. So he called me up. He's like, hey, Peter, you draw, right? I'm like, yeah, I draw on the side. He's like, and you know Photoshop? I'm like, yeah, totally. He's like, well, come in for an interview tomorrow, and we'll give you an interview. I'm like, oh, I thought this is my break out of waitering. So I was like, this is awesome. Hung up the phone. I'm like, what the? Can I swear in this?
Yeah, you can swear. You were just about to.
People knew where you're going anyways.
I'm like, what the fuck is Photoshop? Like, I had no idea, right? So I had a friend called Blake, and he ran this thing called blakesvan.com, and he literally had a van that he'd pull up full of pirated software. And so he pulled up to my house that day.
Is
I'm like,
committing to a crime right now. We
I'm
accomplices.
Like, do you have Photoshop? And so he did. He had like 7 floppy disks. It was Photoshop 3. Like, I don't even think it was called Photoshop before Photoshop 3. They just invented layers. That's how old it was. And we installed it on my computer, and I got one of my illustrations in somehow. It took all night, and I got it in and printed it out somehow and colored it in Photoshop. I didn't understand resolution or anything. And I went to this interview with this printout of this. I'll never forget. It was this guy sitting on a plate of pasta, and I was like, "Yeah, Photoshop. Yeah, I got a million of these if you need them, but just here's an example."
Yeah, I'll take all million. Well, maybe not a million.
So that's how I got into the biz, just through deception and lies, and then it was from then on. I got into kind of web development through Murray. He was the webmaster sitting in a corner webmastering. I got into web development.
Is that a verb?
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay.
It is now. And then kind of went overseas and did some work and came back and got into the marketing business and got into like design. I was always around designers, so they kind of just wore off on me, and then eventually kind of user experience design, and then I'm a bit of a magpie, which kind of speaks to the kind of entrepreneurial side of things. So it was affiliate marketing and content marketing and digital marketing in general is kind of where it kind of ended up, and that's kind of been the career over the last kind of 17 years. But the marketing side has probably been the last, I'd say, dozen of it. So that's in a nutshell, big long story, but that's kind of where it went.
And so, what is ZGM? What is it? What, like, do you guys have something that you kind of focus on, or are you kind of all over the map in terms of marketing?
Well, we're a generalist marketing group. Mm-hmm. So we were Zero Gravity back in the day, about 20 years ago, spun out of a big company called Parallel, which was one of the bigger marketing firms in town. And we spun out as a kind of a payment on results model at the worst time you could possibly do that. It was just the economy was tanking. We had a bunch of shares in a bunch of startups that were all tanking with it. So we quickly moved to fee for service. And around that time, switched over to ZGM, just kind of KFC'd ourselves.
Right.
But we've just grown. We've been like just mostly playing in Alberta, just general marketing and just growing by little bits at a time, some acquisitions here and there. And when I started, we were about a dozen people, and now we're a little over 100 now. And still special, like we're starting to break out and do some things that are interesting, but for the most part it's just full service marketing. We do PR and brand development and campaigns and design and media and all kinds of things. Yeah.
And then so for Bill, obviously I know a little bit about AVF.
I hope so.
Yeah, but so maybe just talk about, how long has that been now since really you've been doing festivals, and because you've kind of seen this whole the evolution, if you want to say, of the beer industry into what it is today.
Well, and I know you know all this, but we started way back in like 2002. We were working to build festivals and support other events and stuff like that, and we quickly realized we wanted to do our own thing, so we did our own food and wine show called Festivus at the old Devonian Gardens. That was pretty cool once we got Howdy out of the pool. And just things like that. It was neat. And one of the things came up when we were trying to do that event was that beer was just totally underrepresented.
Yeah.
And like globally at that time, there was no better place to import beer than Alberta. I think we had about 5 or 6 breweries back then. And so you could bring in beer here and it'd be taxed the same way as if you brewed it here. So that kind of suppressed the local market a bit, but it meant that you had the best beer selection in the world.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people working as agents. So when we started our festival in 2005 was the first year, vast majority of that beer was from somewhere else. And so when you look at the history of the industry, those festivals got people, I think in some ways, got people into beer more than just like macros and general lagers and stuff. They realized like the wide range of flavors and started getting more interested in things. And you'd have to look back and say, well, Big Rock was the big pioneer. I don't want to take too much credit here, but we helped in some ways. Alberta Beer Festivals helped spread the word about this. And as the festivals grew, right, so did the consumer tastes, and they started looking for more. And there was a couple of things that sort of changed how the industry operated here. There's some of the tax laws changed, so it made it a little bit easier for locals to start a brewery. They got a little bit of an advantage. Yeah. That sort of closed the door on a lot of agencies importing, right? But it meant that locally you could have more breweries, but there were still other choke points. And then when Olds College started their brewmaster program about a dozen years ago now, having trained people was so critical, and I didn't realize how critical it was or how short they were until Jordan Ramey, who was one of the instructors at Olds College, mentioned it was like 4 days before they'd ever taught a class. Like the brewmaster college had not existed yet.
Yeah.
The classes weren't scheduled to start for four days, and they were getting calls from breweries saying, "Hey, can we get the contact list for your students?" And Jordan's like, "We haven't taught a class yet." They're like, "We don't care. These people are committed. They obviously want to do it. We'll train them on the job. We want these people." And he's like, "I'm sorry, we're not going to crush our school before we even start." But that demand was there before the school even really existed.
Right.
And then they got into distilling and so on. And so it really grew from there. And they only had, I think, 20 or 25 people that first year. Now they're graduating 30 people every year. And that demand is still in place. Like 12 years later, they've graduated hundreds and hundreds of brewmasters and distillers. And they're still doing that.
Yeah.
That continues to be a big job market. So almost everybody who graduates gets a job in one way or another, and it's a really interesting thing. So now we're at, like, I don't know, over 140 breweries in the province. We're over 40 distilleries in the province. There's meaderies, cideries, all kinds of things that are hyper local, that use local ingredients, and it's a really cool thing to have just been. We had a passenger seater. I think we were a little bit involved, but just to be able to watch it as it grew, and now to be able to support them with Tastely is one of our ultimate goals. Like, we've supported them with the festivals and we try to promote them here with that, but ultimately Tastely is our way to support them when the festivals aren't on, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always think about is, over the course of, the 20 years that we've been doing festivals, you learn how to, market and promote to get people to the festivals, right? And we've had to learn a lot of different, you used a lot of different tools. There was no social media when we started. Now I'm starting to make us all sound old, but it's just like, we use the fax machine to show Ticketmaster what we wanted on the tickets and all that sort of stuff. And so we've kind of watched how you market events evolve through the course of the last 20 years. And so for me, I think of it as, if we can show these breweries and these distilleries and cideries how to attract hundreds of people the way that we have to attract thousands of people to our show, I think it can be a real win for them. So is that kind of, when you go and you talk to them, is that kind of how you're selling it to them? Or
yeah, it's a way to connect with consumers in a way they haven't been, and connect with new consumers, right? Like, lots of times you'll find a favorite and you'll keep going back, but those people are still craving new experiences, and they would love to be presented with the idea. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, hey, do you want to try something new? And they're like, sure. Right. And that's like, you just don't think about it, right? Unless it's sparking that conversation. And we've always said that one of the strengths of our festivals is that people come together over food and drink, right? It's where the best friendships are made, solutions to problems, best ideas, decisions in life.
And then solutions to problems.
Right. And that's what you can do at a lot of these breweries, distilleries, eateries and stuff like that. And bringing people together for a really, truly unique experience then sparks that creativity. So I think that a lot of intangibles will be that great things will come out of this from people having these experiences in these places, and they'll connect to them, right? This isn't like a chain. This isn't a, something that's going somewhere else. This is something that's local, and it's important to support it, but also it's going to be great because you'll have better experiences there and your life will be better.
So Peter, you used a word, hyper collaboration. When we were chatting pre-podcast. So would you call, like, is that essentially what Tastely has become, is kind of a hyper collaboration between ABF and ZGM?
Yeah, I was just talking to someone about this a little while ago, because I've been involved in a number of startups, and I think you have to do that to get to the right point, because you like, at least I do. I have to sometimes learn the hard way with things, but with ABF and ZGM, it really was a little bit of the stars are aligning for the first time. And I've been very good at being able to produce things and make things, but when it comes to promotion and actually getting it into the marketplace, that's always been a bit of a dark spot for me. So that's kind of what ABF brings, is the community and the relationships and those connections to the very people we're trying to build for. And in ZGM, we can build the product, and we can market it and brand it and do all these nice things. And together we can build this kind of great little business without putting out a lot of cost. It doesn't cost a ton of money for us to do, and it doesn't require, it requires some sweat equity, but it's one of those things where it's just, everything's coming together like this perfect jigsaw puzzle, and it just feels the timing's right. We're just getting out of COVID. Everyone's probably hurting a little bit, and they need those new tasters to come in and new customers to come in and become those long-term customers. Tastely's the right vehicle to do that. It's the right timing for us, again, just coming off of a few experiences to allow us to be better and build this thing better. We just bought or acquired Paperleaf, which is a big dev shop out of Edmonton, and they're building this tool, which is, to me, such a great asset. Just having an in-house team that's used to developing products versus, the guy in the basement. Usual startups is one guy in a basement building an app for pretty cheap, but then, he gets a job, or his mom kicks him out of the basement or something like that. And suddenly,
Are you speaking from personal experience?
Suddenly you can't keep up to, the community. And what we really want to do is, as people use this tool, we develop along with it. Some of the most successful software packages out there, like Figma, is a great example of just listening to the community and continuing to iterate and make something that everyone has had a piece of, kind of, this is where it's going to go, versus trying to, do this big release and hope everyone loves it, right? So I think we're starting small with a small community and passionate group, and on both sides, it just feels like, we're all building this thing together, and it's a great feeling. And I get excited just thinking about it.
And I think that was actually a really good sign for Tasty. Like, the Paper Leaf team are great, and we're really lucky that we have them to work with. But they embraced this project. Like, there was true enthusiasm. Like, they were excited to be part of it. And, they would come out and meet with us and just really, really, like, they saw the vision. And that's the nice thing about Tasty, is I think that on both sides, like, once you explain what it is, consumers and vendors are like, yeah, that's why isn't that already a thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
How did that not already happen? Right. How are you the idiots that figured this out? Like, that's, the kind of thing that you hear. No, they didn't say that part, but they do say, like, how is this not already a thing? Yeah, they definitely have it in the back of their head. But it's like, it must be a simple concept if you guys came up with it.
Anytime we can get like a hardcore developer out at like a beer festival, it's a big win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you guys connect then? Because it seems, like you said, it is a good fit of, really, we don't have the foundational knowledge to create an app or a website. Obviously, when pre-Tastely, we had Hoppy Pass, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing, Bill, at some point showed Peter Hoppy Pass. There was enough there where it was exciting to you, but then you thought, oh yeah, I'd love to destroy this and start from the ground up. Or how did the partnership start?
Well, I'd say that you were 100% right. Like, we were trying to use already established software to build Hoppy Pass, and there just wasn't anything out there that fit the functions that we needed.
Right. And
so Peter had been a great touchstone for ABF and for me to reach out, especially during COVID. Like, we did it pre-COVID and just talk shop and, bounce ideas off each other. But during COVID, when it became the beer festivals, bringing people together wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to make the best use of this time? Like, I remember we sat down in the boardroom that one day and we did like 100+ ideas written on that thing. And then we had to go through and go, okay, well, what's going to be useful during COVID and after COVID?
Right.
Well, that made 80 of those 100 disappear pretty quick. And then it's like, okay, well, let's do a feasibility study on these other ones. And we narrowed it down. And at the time we were calling it Hoppy Pass. That was the one that we knew if we built it then, we'd be able to help both during and post COVID when people were coming back in. So that was the goal. Again, couldn't find the software. And that's when we talked to Peter, and he saw the vision that we had. And was like, and guess what? We just bought a dev shop. I'm like, oh, fancy. So let's go do that. And it turned it into a really great partnership, because I think the nice thing because we've all tried partnerships that, jigsaw puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together.
Yeah.
Right. This is one that like sort of fit together seamlessly, in the sense that what they were offering and what we were offering really merged together well.
Yeah.
We work well together as teams. I think we get along. And I think we see the vision, and it's kind of cool. And knowing, I think it's easier to go and work a ton of hours on something that you believe in and that is going to help other people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So you like the idea of Hoppy Pass. I'm putting words in your mouth.
Say I like the idea,
said,
Peter.
But you wanted to kind of, I guess also too, you probably wanted to kind of put your own stamp on it too. But what did you like about the general concept of Hoppy Pass, and what did you kind of look to improve on in terms of branding and changing the name and stuff like that?
Yeah, good question. And I think every agency does this, and we're conscious of this. Of like, you don't have to come in and rebrand everything all the time just because you're new and you want to put your own stamp and get your portfolio piece out of it. Really make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons, not just because you want to do it, right? So when I saw Hoppy Pass and we walked through the concept, it was great. Like, and really trust that there's a need for this in the community. But it just felt like it was a great idea. And as we started talking about it, we just got more excited. And like the thing I think we can bring sometimes to these is just outside perspective. You guys are so much into the brewery community in Alberta, and for us, we can be objective, and that's one of the great advantages of being at the beginning of a project from out of nowhere is you get this little window of being completely objective for a while, and you gradually lose it. Yeah. Eventually, we're all drinking the Kool-Aid, right? But at the beginning, we can look at this thing from a top level view and go, hey, this is great, but it could be bigger than this, and it could also be this, and it could be that. And we had these great conversations around what could Hoppy Pass be, and that's where we started to talk about like, well, it could be just beyond breweries. Like there's breweries, but there's great distilleries and meaderies and cideries and even food. Anyone who has a tasting experience to give, this could be it, right? And we could potentially go beyond Alberta, although this is where we should focus right now. But that's where we led to like, okay, Hoppy Pass as a brand may be a little too limiting if our scope is going to be big, right? And let's just talk about experiences and culinary, and that's why we got into Tastely, and we rebranded together, which I thought was a fun exercise, and we got somewhere good. And then, yeah, software. Always, again, if you're going to do something like this, you know, you can start with something off the shelf, but pretty quickly you run into walls, and then you're looking at compromising the vision or starting from scratch. And we had the ability to start from scratch. We hadn't started yet. We might as well. And so that's what we did, right?
Nice. So you're launching soon, right? In the summer of 2023, Tastely will launch. Peter, you mentioned, you know, I think it's important that you do start with a kind of a small community to make sure that, you know, you're getting that feedback from people, and you're getting kind of like, here's how we're using it, and just kind of, you know, being able to be responsive to people. So starting out small, what's the vision for Tasty? Like, where do you guys see it hopefully in, let's say, a year, 3 years from now?
Well, I think that, you know, to start with, we're going to launch with about between 20 and 30 members, and really just show them a ton of love to make sure that we've got this dialed in properly and that we're supporting them. And then we'll grow. Our goal is to scale province wide within, you know, a year and a half to 2 years, and make sure that, because we're working with like, you know, the Alberta Food Tourism Initiative and Travel Alberta and the Alberta Small Brewers Association and the Small Distillers Association and hotel associations, and really refining the program to make sure that all these partners are seeing value and that they're feeding off of each other in a really positive way. And then once we get to that point where we feel like it's running really well, then we can look at where we would scale out from there. But first, walk before we run, and we want to make sure we grow at the right rate. Yeah. Right. So as people come on board, that they're seeing that, getting the full support and experience of the team, and make sure we're growing at the same pace that we're adding numbers.
And then as you evolve, like how do you incorporate the feedback that you get from your, you know, from your partners, you know, because, you know, you go and you chat to a local brewery about what the concept is for Tastely. Are they coming back to you with, oh yeah, what about this? What about that? And, you know, it's hard, because if you are getting that, you know, that feedback, you know, you can't incorporate everything. And so how do you kind of take that feedback, and how does that help you determine maybe what your vision is going to be?
I think the events function is a really good example of that. Like, we went out thinking tours and tastings was going to be the thing that we were offering. Yeah. A bunch of the breweries said, yeah, tours, no. Like, some of them love it. Some of them are like, it just doesn't fit for our business, right? But we do these one-off events, whether it be an Oktoberfest or an open mic, like music night or a comedy night or whatever. We'd really like to find a way to not only promote that, but have a booking system around. And so that's why we're adding the event function, and we're trying to respond to requests. Not every request. We parking lot a lot of them, but the one that's coming up the most was one-off events within their building. How can we promote that and sort of sell that? Yeah. And so now we're tours, tastings, and in-house events as some of the offerings that we have. And we have a list of other things we're going to offer in the future, but it'll just have to, again, as we scale up, we want to make sure we're doing those three things well before we add other features and stuff like that. Yeah,
they kind of fall into three categories, right? There's features that, you know, vendors are looking for, or customers. Then there's bugs, right? And this happens, right? With any kind of software, there's always little things you didn't predict, and suddenly someone's trying to do three things at once and it breaks the system. So those are things that we react to instantly. And then there's also features that we want as the business. So, you know, maybe we want better reporting, or maybe we want this and that, or maybe we want to offer discounts or whatever. So we just kind of put them into a priority list and rank them together and upvote them and that kind of thing. And then we do scheduled releases. And that's part of the rigor, again, that a development group can bring to the table versus just knee-jerking every single request, because then you end up with a Christmas tree, right? You've got a whole bunch of things that are going on. Maybe there's not a unified vision because you've kind of gone off in one corner. Someone said they want the ability for their dog to book tastings or something, and you built this thing and you realize no one else wants it. That's a terrible example, but
yeah,
it's easy to get excited if someone's passionate about something or someone's yelling about something. It's easy to go off course. So it's just a lot of it is making sure we have a clear project plan that's got the ability to skew, but we have those conversations to make sure we're not going off strategy.
Yeah, because I can imagine it would be, with all the breweries, distilleries being as unique as they are, they're going to look at it differently, and it's tempting to want to solve every need. It's all of a sudden it's just like, oh, this app has become this kind of Frankenstein kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of, I guess, pivoting. I hate that word, but that's the word I'm using.
I hope I never hear that word again.
So you guys have both been, in doing what you do for 20 plus years. So I'm always curious, what is it for you, Peter? What is it that keeps you kind of passionate, keeps you excited when it comes to, being in the same industry for as long as you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think especially as I look now, I definitely have that kind of entrepreneurial. I like starting new things and I like getting things going and off the ground. And you look at even just my career, like I've kind of changed from illustration to web development to design to UX to marketing and then CRM work and all kinds of stuff. So I like kind of new challenges, and that's why I think entrepreneurial life fits well with me. Even though I'm employed, it gives me an opportunity to live that life, and I love the chaos of it. Like I always call it happy chaos, which is startup life, right? You can't predict everything that's going to go well. Things, sometimes you have to do 20 things in 1 hour, and sometimes you got nothing to do in an hour. And it's just, it goes up and down, and you've got these launches and all these things that kind of put in stress, but to me, it's an okay stress. I kind of like that kind of energy that it brings. So that's kind of what kept me going throughout all this time is, once you kind of got something under your belt and you feel like you're good at it, or you're kind of doing the same thing of like, okay, well, what's next? How can I get into something else? And with ZGM, it was usually like, how can I bring something else into ZGM that we could be good at? Like affiliate marketing. We don't do any of that. So maybe I can learn that and start to incorporate that back into the office and backfill what I'm doing and try something new. So even though I've been in marketing for a long time, there's so many aspects to it that you can keep bouncing around, which is good.
Yeah,
especially for my brain.
Bill, what about you? When you think about the beer industry, the beer community, 20 plus years, what kind of gets you excited every day to come to work, even though some days you sleep in, like for example today?
You know what? It's still the people. It's still the coming together over food and drink and just like fun conversations or like meaningful conversations or growth conversations and just like the people you get to meet. Like I'm really, really pumped to still like be with these people because there is something common about the type of person that would take the risk to start really anything.
Yeah.
Right. Entrepreneurs are like, they're not all the same type of people, but they do have that one commonality that they had the courage to take a risk, which if you ask them afterwards, be like, I don't know if I would have started it if I'd known how hard it was going to be. Because like, but like so many times in my life, I'll just stop where I'm working. I'll look around and go, well, if I hadn't started the company, I never would be in this place. And this is a cool spot. Like it doesn't even have to be like fancy or like what other people would think of as rewarding. It just has to be like, this is a unique experience and I'm getting to do it. And most people will never see or do or feel what I'm feeling in this moment. And that's a really cool thing too. So
absolutely. So I sometimes ask people what the best advice. So for you, Peter, if you're giving, so someone's starting out in like the marketing industry or whatever, you said, look for the crack in the door as the advice. And I just wanted you to explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's funny. This is mostly my career, but I think people, especially students, when I talk to students, think that their big breaks are going to be kind of presented to them as like a gift that they can open, or it's just going to hit them over the head, like
really obvious. You mean?
Yeah. And and I found that most of my breaks have been almost imperceptible. Like it's just a little thing. Like someone said, "Hey, yeah, sure, I'll meet you for a coffee or something." I don't know. Or yeah, you could maybe talk to that person, but little things like that if I hadn't have followed up through, is a little bit to your conversation about, like, if you hadn't followed this thread, you would never have gotten to this big thing. But I always say, it's like, if you see a little crack in the door, it's your job to kick it open. It's not going to be wide open to begin with, right? So it's looking for opportunities, and they say, I think there's a quote about people who are lucky tend to be more observant. That's kind of the correlation. Like, people aren't generally lucky; they just are looking more than everyone else, right? They don't have tunnel vision. So if you're open to opportunities and you could see things and you follow through, like even this, like, I can't remember, but at some point I remember reaching out to, it might have been you or one of you, just almost on a whim. I was like, oh man, I like beer, and these guys, I'd love to be associated somehow with ABF. And it was just a whim. It was an email that went out. And if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be sitting here doing this. Like, it's crazy how that kind of works. And that's been my career. It's just been trying to, like, chase after the things that may or may not have looked that great at the beginning, but they open up into something. So it's just, looking around and over your shoulder and around and just making sure that you're not missing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there's books behind you, Bill. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
That would require me having to turn my head. So.
You're an avid reader. What's your favorite book?
Favorite book of all time?
Of all time. And then what's your current book that you're reading?
The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's every time I read it, I've probably read it like 20 times. Every time I read it, I find some new piece of information, and it's almost like whatever I'm going through at that moment in my life, there's something in there for it, right? Yeah. Like you can just read it as a story. It can just be like a straight story about this kid who goes on an adventure, or every page can have a lesson in it, and it's built into the text. And so I find that every time I read it, I go, oh yeah, that's good advice, right? It's just unending advice coming out of that book. What I'm reading right now is Jay Shetty's How to Be a Monk, How to Live Like a Monk. I should really look at the cover because apparently I haven't. But it's that one I find really interesting just because there's a really cool quote he has. It's a Navy SEAL quote, and it's like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And so like when we're doing something like starting Tastely, which I think I've already used Peter's line of, like, we were building the plane as we were trying to fly it. There's so much going on and you just feel pulled in multiple different directions. Plus we're trying to do ABF stuff and just like have a life, and all of a sudden you feel overwhelmed, and it's like, whoa, slow down, just take a moment. Because when you do one thing at a time and you do it properly and you do it slowly, you're actually going to accomplish things much faster. Right. And so little bits of information that come out of that I like. And so I'm combining the last question with this one, but books I'm reading and the advice you get, I find that, and it's also what mindset you're in, right? Like whatever you're facing, that was the last good quote I heard was, the challenges you're going through right now are the price you pay to get where you wanted to be, or where you said you wanted to be. Yeah. Right. So like if you're starting a business or you're whatever it is you're doing, there are going to be sacrifices if you truly want to get there. Unless you're one of those people who just says they want to do things, or like it sounds cool at parties. I'm going to study for my LSAT, or I'm starting a log cabin building business, or whatever it is you're up to. You're either like in the thick of it and hurting from that and wondering why you did it, or you're just saying you're going to do it.
Well, most people want to just be, it's like guitar for me. I would love to know how to play the guitar. I don't want to learn how to play the guitar. It's like, I just want to be able to look at it and be like, yeah. So I think,
but you have the hair for it, at least.
That's right. But like, being an entrepreneur it's a lifestyle that it's going to take you 30, 40 years. There's no like, opt out kind of thing, right? It's just kind of like, if you've defined yourself as an entrepreneur or of that mindset, it's the life you're going to live, right?
And it becomes part of your whole life, right? Like you still, as much as you don't want to, and you got to learn to shut off your brain, because you'll take that stuff home with you. If you're working for somebody else, unless you're going to get yelled at for it, you don't, at the end of the day, you're like, see you later. Thanks. I'll be back for my shift tomorrow. Yeah. You're not thinking, oh God, I really hope the company's doing well, or that I didn't miss anything. You're like, meh, right? Whereas when you own the company, there is nobody else. Yeah. I remember I saw Wayne Leung speak to I was speaking to a graduating class from UFC, and Wayne Leung went on before me, and he had him in the palm of his hand. He was like, yeah, if you own your own business, You set your own hours. And they're all like, oh yeah, that's great. He's like, yeah, you can come in the morning when you want. You know what? You can leave whenever you want. You want to leave in the afternoon? You should leave in the afternoon. And they're just like, they're all grinning. I'm watching them. They're just smiling. Hey, this is so great. Like, owning my own business is going to be so easy. And then he goes, yeah, but guess what? When you show up the next day, all the work for the day before that you didn't do because you left, it's still going to be there. And then the next day's work, and there's probably something blowing up, and there's probably something leaking. And there's that. And he just goes and he just traumatizes his class. But you know what? It was what they needed to hear. It's not what they wanted to hear, but it was definitely what they needed to hear, right? And it probably scared 80% off.
Yeah.
And the 20% that still did it knew what they were going to get into thanks to his wise words, right? So I like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It needs to be, don't romanticize the concept. Just like it's going to be a grind.
Well, you can't just watch Field of Dreams and hope. That can't be your business plan, right?
Yeah.
Like, and too many people, it's like, well, if I built it, it's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Oh, I've done that.
Yeah.
Watch Field of Dreams?
Oh, well, both.
Okay.
So for Tastely, just say if there's a potential, a vendor, whether it's a brewery, distillery, cidery, that maybe wants to join, like what's the onboarding process there?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. You can do it just on the site. You just go sign up in the top right, and then there's a little tab for vendors, right? So you just fill out the form, and away you go, right? You fill out your profile. You put up an experience. You think of experiences as products, right? So you put up your profile, that gets you a presence on Tastely, and then you make an experience, right? An experience, like we said, can be a tour. It can be a tour and tasting. Again, we're going to be launching events right away, so you could put up events, that type of thing. But you can be up in an hour or less, right, depending on how much time you put into these things. But we found the more the more you work on the photos and your stories and stuff, the better it's going to be for you.
Right.
But it's not a long process at all. And we've got a support team if anyone needs a hand with any of that process.
And a lot of the information is available at tastelybookings.com. Right? So you can go on there and go to the resource section and everything you need, like your tasting notes pages, your reservation sign, how to host an experience, like if you just want to give that to your staff for training, right? And all the benefits of it, how to onboard, everything's right there laid out for you. Yeah,
tastelybookings.com is specifically just for vendors. And so there's a little growing area for them. And then tastely.fun is the customer facing one, and that's where you would actually sign up.
Yeah. So Tastely, like I said, next couple of weeks kind of thing, depending on when people are listening to the podcast, tastely.fun will be up and people will be able to book experiences.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's kind of fun to see how this has evolved, from, like I said, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
With it being Hoppy Pass and, you and your team coming in and saying, oh, we love it. We'll blow it up and change everything. But other than that, we love the idea.
Yeah.
No, it's been a lot of work, a lot of probably days of going like, what the hell are we doing? So it's fun to see it coming to this point, and it's exciting to see, where it goes from here. So thanks for taking the time to share the story, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We're excited. Hopefully next time we're back, we'll be able to tell you how much it's grown and how well it's doing.
Yeah.
That's right.
I just made the assumption he's going to have us back, though. Yeah. You see the look on his face? Like, no.
See you next week.
I have never agreed to that, okay?
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark.